want to summarize a few points here. Think of these as things that I've learned over my career that have adjusted my attitudes for working on projects that you might think about as well, because I found them to be very valuable to really give me a leap forward in being more effective myself and how I work with others. The first one is to really think collaboration. You may do a lot of work on your projects all by yourself, individually, but you should always be thinking about how that work serves the overall context for the project. And even if you're the only one on the project, you probably also have a sponsor, somebody who's asking you to do this work, and you probably have somebody who is the consumer of the work that you're doing. If you can't identify them, you need to really ask yourself why you're doing this work. So you want to, as much as possible, think about making sure that everybody that is involved in the project is literally on the same page. In organizations, very often there's a really deep hierarchy. On projects, I like to think of flattening that hierarchy, and even if you and your supervisor and your supervisor's supervisor are all working on the same project, when you're talking about project issues, you want to think about engaging more as peers rather than in a hierarchical sense. Work collaboratively to solve problems with the respect and integrity and trust of everyone that you're engaging with. You want to keep that shared understanding going all the way through, and it doesn't work when people get into silos. The second thing is to make sure that you want to engage everyone on the project. There are some people who are naturally quieter, who are less likely to speak out, to express their opinion. It may be a cultural thing, it may be a power issue that's happening in the organization. It might be internal motivations where some people like to step back and think things through rather than speak out in meetings. Whatever it might be that's driving this, what we want to do when we're working collaboratively is to make sure that everybody has a voice that needs to be heard, needs to be respected, and needs to be brought in so that we have that comprehensive understanding of the problem space, the solution space, and everybody can contribute the best that they can on the project. In meetings, make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. Make sure everybody is listening when everybody else is speaking. Use whatever you need to do to make sure that everybody contributes fairly and effectively and respectfully on your projects. Don't do templates. That's one of my pet peeves, because I used to work in an organization where we sold a collection of templates on projects. One of the things that I found in most organizations that use templates is that they use them incorrectly. Let's say that we're starting a project and we need to put together a project charter or a project nutshell, as I described in this workshop. If you've got a template for a project charter, in a lot of organizations, somebody will take that charter and they'll say, Alice, can you fill in that project template for us? And then we'll be done the chartering stage. Or fill it in, throw it over the wall, and we'll review it and we'll get back to you and we'll iterate back and forth and we'll do that. That is a dangerous way of using templates for a couple of reasons. One is that it's produced simply from Alice's perspective. Now, she may go out and survey other people and get their opinions, but it's really her who is the author, the person at the keyboard who's capturing all this information, and it's going to be very strongly Alice biased. Not that Alice is necessarily a bad thing. Then when she throws it over the wall for review, generally when we're handed a document to review, there's a strong tendency to feel the pressure to find flaws in it, to fix it, to identify issues. And that's what we'll tend to do. And so it's going to go back and forth over the wall, and it's going to consume a lot of time trying to reconcile all of those issues. And if it's distributed to 10 people, there's going to be different, sometimes conflicting feedback that is going to have to be dealt with. It's very awkward, it's very painful, it's very expensive to do that using documents and sending them back and forth that way. What should really be done, what I think is a much more effective way of doing this, again, when we talk about collaboration, is to take that template, let's say it's a project charter, and that charter will have a table of contents that will include a lot of things that we talked about on our project nutshell page. Key stakeholders, what's the value we want to deliver, what are the success criteria, what are the assumptions, what are the key risks. Think of that table of contents as an agenda for a meeting where you get together and discuss and reconcile these differences live, face to face, or on Zoom or whatever, and that the outcome of those conversations can then be persisted in the template, and that becomes the basis of saying, yes, we've completed our chartering for this project. That has the additional benefit in that now the review process isn't everybody individually giving back their feedback and sending it over, but the review process is simply, yes, this document contains everything that we agreed on in that conversation that we had in that collaborative meeting. Very straightforward that way. You're going to get through things faster. You're going to have the conversations, the right conversations, because it's based on an agenda rather than a free-flowing meeting. It's going to work way better for you. So templates have their utility if they're used as a way of driving conversation. You want to be reasonable on your project, and being reasonable on project is a couple of things. One is that you don't want to overkill your project by using too many complex tools or tools that do not serve communication needs as effectively as others, or tools that aren't redundant, that aren't even necessary for what you're doing. And the second thing is that you want to build a story, you want to do the work together based on reasonable expectations of what you can achieve. The way this is manifested the wrong way in a lot of projects is primarily when organizations build a schedule based on a constraint they're given without any concern about whether it is feasible the time that is allocated for each of those tasks. So however you do it, you want to make sure that you are building towards a story that everybody believes makes sense, that is reasonable, that is feasible. Doing that story is going to be useful for longer than if you build a story where you've just crammed everything in and doesn't really represent how or how long work will be done on a project. What you see very often on projects is that you reach a point in the project where it kind of descends into chaos because there isn't really a context that you're able to follow that meets the reality of how the work remaining has to be done. Always stay current, and the most important way of doing that is to be reasonable with your estimates, with your expectations of others, and don't try to just squeeze things down to fit expectations early. The final thing, and that kind of ties to the last one as well, is to stay on top of things. If you invest the time to build a really good story of how the project is going to play out, and if you invest the time to have the conversations about how we're going to work together to do our best work, to have psychological safety, to work well as a team, you want to be able to manage everything that you're using as this context for our culture and for our work. You want it to stay current, because as soon as you lose track of that, again, as I said a few minutes ago, you're going to descend into chaos. Like that quote in the early parts of this workshop, the plan will always be out of date, but the planning is essential. And I would say the same for our agreement about how we're going to work together can always use some additional tweaks. And we need to continue to focus and make those tweaks as we go through. You want to take all of that effort that you did up front and preserve the fidelity of all those things so that you've got control over your project all the way through your project, in terms of the work you do and in terms of how you engage with one another on your teams. I think those are 5 attitudes that are really worth considering on your projects.